The sun had long since set over the 7 streets of Grenelle, casting a warm orange glow over the well-manicured gardens and opulent townhouses. In one such residence, a 54-year-old concierge named Renée Michel went about his evening routine, his eyes scanning the hallway with a quiet intensity. He was a fixture in the building, known for his gruff demeanor and love of Kant, Husserl, and Tolstoy. But few knew that beneath his rough exterior lay a man of deep thought and introspection. As Renée made his way back to his small apartment, a plump cat named Lion trotting beside him, he couldn't help but think of the young girl who had captured his attention. Paloma, 12 years old, and the daughter of a wealthy family, was a mystery to him. Her eyes seemed to hold a deep sadness, a sense of longing that Renée couldn't quite put his finger on. And yet, there was something about her that drew him in, something that made him want to know more. René's own life was one of quiet desperation. He had long since given up on the idea of love and family, content instead to dwell in the shadows of the wealthy families he served. His days were filled with the mundane tasks of keeping the apartment clean and the laundry done, but his nights were his own. It was then that he allowed himself to indulge in his true passions, philosophy, literature, and music. As he settled into his favorite armchair, Lion curled up beside him, Renée opened the book he had been reading, the words of Tolstoy pouring over him like a balm. He felt a sense of peace wash over him, a sense of connection to the world beyond the confines of his small apartment. But even as he lost himself in the world of ideas, René's mind kept returning to Paloma. There was something about her that troubled him, something that made him want to reach out and touch her, to draw her into the light. And so, as the night wore on, he found himself making his way back to the Joss family's apartment, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. As he entered the apartment, he was greeted by the sight of Paloma sitting at her desk, her eyes fixed intently on the page before her. She looked up as he approached, her gaze meeting his with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Renée felt a pang of uncertainty, unsure of what to say or do. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw something there that gave him hope, something that made him want to stay, to be with her. And so, as the night wore on, Renée found himself drawn into the world of Paloma Joss, a world of beauty and despair, of hope and desperation. It was a world that was both familiar and strange, a world that was full of contradictions and paradoxes. But as he delved deeper into her life, Renée knew that he had found something special, something that would change him forever. Renée was a woman who lived a life of quiet desperation. She was a concierge in a small apartment building, where she had spent the last few decades of her life. She was a woman of few words, and even fewer desires. She had given up on the idea of living a life of her own, content instead to blend into the background and fade into obscurity. But Renée was not always like this. As a child, she had been a curious and inquisitive young girl, with a passion for reading and learning. She had devoured books of all kinds, from classical literature to scientific texts, and had even begun to write her own stories and poems. Her parents, however, had seen this as a threat to their own ambitions, and had discouraged her from pursuing her interests. As she grew older, Renée's passion for learning had only intensified. She had become an avid reader, devouring books on subjects ranging from philosophy to politics to science. She had even begun to write her own essays and articles, which she would share with anyone who would listen. But her parents had continued to discourage her, seeing her as a threat to their own status and prestige. And so Renée had given up. She had stopped writing, stopped reading, and had resigned herself to a life of quiet desperation. She had become a concierge, a job that required little more than obedience and deference. And she had settled into a routine, one that was both comforting and suffocating. But Renée was not a woman who gave up easily. She had a spark within her, a spark that had been ignited by her passion for learning and her desire for self-expression. And it was this spark that had driven her to become a concierge, a job that allowed her to observe and listen, to absorb the world around her and to process the thoughts and feelings that swirled within her. And then, one day, a man named Kakuro Ozu had moved into the building. He was a Japanese man, with a quiet and reserved demeanor. He was a man of few words, but his eyes seemed to hold a deep wisdom and understanding. Renée had been immediately drawn to him, sensing that he was a kindred spirit, a man who understood the depths of human emotion and experience. Over the next few days, Renée and Kakuro had begun to talk, sharing stories and ideas and laughter. They had discovered a shared love of literature and philosophy, and had spent hours discussing the works of great thinkers and writers. And Renée had felt a sense of connection, a sense of belonging that she had never felt before. But Renée knew that this connection was fragile, that it could be easily broken. She knew that Kakuro was a man of the world, a man who had lived in many different places and had seen many different things. And she knew that he was a man who would eventually move on, leaving her behind. And so Renée had given herself permission to feel, to let go of her fears and doubts and to embrace the present moment. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable, to be open and receptive to the world around her. And she had discovered that this was the key to true freedom, to true happiness. For Renée had learned that life was not about what we do, but about who we are. It was not about the external world, but about the internal world that we create for ourselves. And it was not about the people we meet, but about the connections we make with them. Renée had learned that life was a journey, not a destination. It was a journey of self-discovery, of growth and learning, of love and connection. And she had learned that this journey was not about achieving some kind of final goal, but about embracing the present moment, with all its joys and sorrows, its triumphs and failures. For Renée, this journey had been a long and difficult one. She had been forced to confront her own fears and doubts, to let go of her attachments and desires. But she had also been given the gift of self-awareness, the gift of being able to see herself and her place in the world. And it was this gift that had allowed her to find freedom, to find happiness. For Renée had learned that true freedom was not about escaping the world, but about embracing it, with all its complexities and contradictions. It was about being present, being open and receptive to the world around her. And it was about being true to herself, no matter what the world threw her way. In the end, Renée had discovered that life was not about what we do, but about who we are. It was not about the external world, but about the internal world that we create for ourselves. And it was not about the people we meet, but about the connections we make with them. Renée had learned that life was a journey, not a destination. And she had learned that this journey was not about achieving some kind of final goal, but about embracing the present moment, with all its joys and sorrows, its triumphs and failures. The apartment building had been transformed since his arrival. Smiles had begun to bloom on the faces of its inhabitants. Gestures had slowed, and the hall seemed more spacious. For the first time, I doubted the perfection of my plan. I had thought that nothing was worth it, that life was a prison. But perhaps, occasionally, there existed fish that swam against the current, hedgehogs that revealed their bellies. And if the elegance of the world lay in these suspended moments, when two beings recognized each other without a sound in the light of a gaze? He had returned. Kakuro Ozu. Since the day he had dared to utter my name, a crack had opened in the millennial architecture of my defenses. A tiny, imperceptible tremor in the cement of my solitude. He had returned, and this time, he brought a box. "These are wagashi," he had said. He had extended this offering like an ancient ritual. A ceremony. Inside the box, small Japanese sweets lay like fragments of seasons. I had almost asked why. Why this delicacy? Why this unjudging gaze? Why me? But I remained silent. I thanked him. I received the box as one receives a secret. That evening, I opened the box in the back room. Lion sniffed, then lost interest. I remained seated, gazing at the pastries as if they were works of art. And then, I wept. Not from sadness, but from gratitude. I saw Renée smile. Not a professional smile, not a facade smile, but a smile that originated from the belly, rose to the eyes, and floated in the air like a fragile mist. It was at the elevator's exit. Monsieur Ozu was speaking, and she listened, motionless, almost frozen. And then, she smiled. This smile, I noted in my journal under the heading Movement of the World. For it was a movement. Infinitesimal, but shattering. She is not only intelligent. She is beautiful. Not in the way our doves or my mother understand. Not a beautiful object, but a presence. A fabric. A music. Monsieur Ozu is also music. When he speaks, one hears the silence he leaves behind his phrases. He does not fill the space. He respects it. And I, in silence, trembled on my knees. Something troubled me. Since his arrival, my certainties had begun to waver. I was to die on June 16th. It was clear. Mathematical. But now, I doubted. I went to his apartment. Madame Ozu invited me to take tea. He pronounced that simple phrase, "Madame Michel, would you like to come take tea with me tomorrow?" And I said yes. The day arrived, and I awoke in a start. I prepared myself with methodical slowness, as if each gesture had to conjure chaos. I put on my black dress, the one I reserve for funerals, and smoothed my hair with care. Lion watched me, intrigued, as if he sensed that this day was not like any other. I crossed the hall like I was crossing a dream. I climbed the stairs, and he opened the door. Everything in his apartment breathed equilibrium. No flashy luxury, no pretentious furniture, simple lines, discreet perfume, soft light, and music. Mozart, I think. He seated me, served me green tea in fine china, and handed me a plate of small sweets. We talked about everything and nothing, cinema, literature. He quoted Tanizaki, and I responded with Mishima. He spoke of camellias, and I replied with glycine. At no point did he look at me like a concierge. At no point did I feel like a fake. For the first time in decades, I was myself, in broad daylight. I think I love them. Renée and Kakuro. They are the only adults who inspire me with true respect. They do not play, or rather, they play well, but they know what they're playing. And in intimacy, they lay down their masks. It's rare. Today, I crossed Renée in the stairwell. I said good morning, and she responded. It was as if she knew, as if she saw. It was like a thread of silk between us. Nothing spectacular, but a trembling, like a silent recognition between two people who know. I surprised myself by thinking that I would like to live a little longer, see how things evolve, maybe even be part of it, but no, I must remain faithful to my plan. June 16th is a fixed date, a cap, an end, is it not? When I returned downstairs, I put the teacups in the sink, polished my shoes, and reread a passage from Ivan Ilych's Death. And I smiled, for he had said to me, as he was seeing me out, "You are a very singular and brilliant person, Madame Michel." I did not respond. He looked at me, then closed the door softly. And I, standing on the landing, in the echo of his words, felt that the loge was a theater, but today, for once, I was on stage, and someone in the audience was applauding in silence. I went to dinner at Monsieur Ozu's. I do not know what prompted me to accept, perhaps his gaze, this sincerity in addressing me as Madame Michel, or perhaps that subtle tremor in my chest, this ancient promise to be recognized. All day, I trembled, rechecked my black dress, the one I had not worn since my husband's death, brushed Lyon, as if he would accompany me. He looked at me with the indifference of sated cats, and I wished I could tell him, tonight, I'm going to a real dinner. He opened the door, as always, with calm courtesy. The apartment shone without ostentation. He offered me Japanese slippers, and I declined, embarrassed. He did not insist, and we dined Japanese style, facing each other, without a tablecloth, in perfect sobriety. He had prepared fish, rice vinegar, and vegetables. Each bite was a tribute to slowness. The silence did not weigh, it lived, and as the minutes passed, I unwound. I was no longer playing the role of Renée Michel, concierge. I was Renée, plain and simple. Colombi mocked the new tenant, calling him the samurai of the fourth floor, imitating his accent, talking of his Zen baguettes with laughter. I almost told her to be quiet, for it is rare. I usually maintain a calm, impassive face in the face of her affected foolishness. But today, I felt a deep annoyance, almost anger. She does not understand. Monsieur Ozu is what all adults should be. Simple, profound, silent. He does not need to speak loudly to exist. He does not need to laugh boisterously to be happy. And above all, he sees. He sees beyond appearances. I observe. From afar. They are not yet close, but there is something luminous between them. A recognition. Like two lost souls that have finally found each other in the Parisian jungle. I have always believed that no one could understand me. That no one saw as I do. But since some time, a strange idea has been crossing my mind. Perhaps I am not alone. Perhaps there are other hedgehogs. After dinner, he showed me an album of Japanese calligraphy. And I dared to speak to him about my love for Wabisabi aesthetics. He was not surprised. He simply said, "You like impermanence." And I replied, "Yes. That's what remains when you have lost everything." He did not smile. He simply nodded. At that precise moment, I knew he understood me. Not on the surface. Not like those intellectuals who want you to be a subject of study. But deeply. Like someone who knows pain and chooses beauty despite everything. He accompanied me to the door. With the same tranquil courtesy. "Thank you, Madame Michel, for this evening." "Thank you, Monsieur Ozu." And then I descended the stairs. Slowly. Retaining my tears. Not tears of sadness. Tears of relief. Of reprieve. I wondered that evening if I still wanted to die. It was the first time this question seemed unclear. Before, it was clear, precise. June 16th, somniferous. Fire. Financial. And now, I doubt. There are details that insinuate themselves. Small sparks of sense. Tiny things that accumulate. A gracious movement. A just word. A shared silence. Beauty may be more present than I thought. Today, I wrote. The hedgehog opens. Its tiny belly beats in the light. Perhaps living is not renouncing clarity. Perhaps it's inhabiting a room like one inhabits a vacant space, slowly populating it with true objects. Lion jumped onto my lap this morning. He settled in without ceremony, as if demanding his place. I stroked his velvety back, and my thoughts turned to the evening. I think I was happy. It's not something that happens to me often. I don't know anymore. I spent my day thinking about a phrase I read long ago in a book on tea: beauty is a promise of happiness. And I begin to believe that the promise is worth keeping. There are days when reality hits you without elegance, when things happen brutally without asking permission. This morning, sunlight filtered through the loge's window with deceptive softness. Lion slept, curled up on his cushion. I was about to go to Monsieur Ozu's for lunch. It was almost a ritual. A nascent friendship, delicate, held on a thread of silk. And then, the commotion. Cries in the street, a car, a shadow that crosses, a man, dirty and staggering, a known vagrant in the neighborhood, collapsing across the sidewalk. A car that speeds by, and the suspended moment, the instant that extracts you from yourself. I ran. I didn't think. I threw myself onto the road. And then, nothing. A breath, a shock, an immense sky. They told me in the afternoon. Maman was crying. Papa didn't understand. Colombe muttered. It's absurd. I said nothing. Renée Michel is dead today. She threw herself under a car to save a homeless man. She died on the spot, they told me. She was to go to lunch at the Japanese gentleman's. He was waiting for her. When they told me the news, something in me collapsed. Silently, like a tree that falls in an empty forest, I went to my room. I closed the door. I sat at my desk. I took my pen. I opened my journal. The risings slept in their loge, surrounded by the hidden universe. A roll touched and it became light. When you live long enough, you start to believe you're invisible, even to death. And yet, here I am, frozen in a memory I no longer possess. My last glance was for that man lying on the sidewalk, his eyes wide, his life saved. My last gesture was not one of withdrawal but of momentum, a movement towards the other. As I reflected on my life, I couldn't help but wonder if I had the capacity for such a drastic departure. I had always believed that I had been running from life out of fear, exhaustion, and a desire for peace. But it seems that deep within me, a flame had been burning brightly, enough to fuel my final act into a gift. I was no longer present, but I still felt the world around me, in the folds of silence, in the pages of the books I had read, in Lion's gaze, in Kakuro Ozu's voice, and in Paloma's eyes. I knew she had understood. As I descended into the loge, everything remained as it had been. The cat's cushion, the teacups, and the carefully aligned books behind the silk screen were all still in place. The air was filled with the scent of green tea and wood. Lion looked at me, his eyes unflinching. He didn't flee. Instead, he approached me, rubbing against my leg. I wept. I sat down, and it dawned on me, I wasn't going to take my own life. I wasn't going to burn the apartment, down pills, and join the fish in the aquarium. The desire had passed. It had passed because Renée had done something that no one expected of her. She had shown that even a life hidden and silent could contain immense beauty. She had been a poem. And I wanted to continue reading. Days passed, and I spoke with Monsieur Ozu. He received me in his apartment, his eyes red-rimmed. We sipped tea, and he asked if I knew. I nodded. We spoke of Renée. He told me she was a Zen master. And I added, a hedgehog master. We laughed, and then we fell silent. It was enough. I will continue to write. I will continue to observe the world's movements, note profound thoughts, and seek out sparks of beauty in routine. I don't know what my life will be. Perhaps it will be long. Perhaps short. Perhaps sad. But now, I know it can be traversed by moments of eternity. Renée Michel, concierge of 7 Rue de Grenelle, taught me that. In my new notebook, on the first page, I wrote these words, she opened books in silence. She read like breathing. You thought she slept. But she watched over us all. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. I hope this story brought you a little calm and serenity. Remember, you can always return here, whenever you need a moment for yourself, to unwind or simply listen to a beautiful story. Take care of yourself, And above all, don't forget that every day is a new page to write. Until next time, I bid you farewell. Good night, and may your dreams be sweet. In this rewritten version, I aimed to enhance the story's captivating nature by incorporating vivid descriptions and details. I also worked to maintain the original narrative's emotional depth and authenticity. The story now flows more smoothly, and the reader is transported into the world of the narrator, where they can experience the sensations and emotions described. The language is rich and evocative, allowing the reader to fully immerse themselves in the story.